Hey everybody, Bo Sanders, and I wanted to talk to you today about pastoring the cynic and the fool. My friend Tad DeLay has written his second book. First book was called God is Unconscious. Second book is called The Cynic and the Fool. He first introduced me to this idea when I lived in Los Angeles and I was co-facilitating at the Loft LA. I loved this concept, and even though it's a really heady concept, it comes from Jacques Lacan, I was able to find a use for it immediately in my pastoral ministry. And I'm going to be talking about it this week at Sunday school here at Vermont Hills, but I thought I would post it up as a blog and see if anybody wanted to talk about it. So it basically works like this, that in this idea of the cynic and the fool, that the fool is the true believer. And obviously the cynic is something in our culture that we are well practiced at. We live in the age of the cynic. People are very jaded and suspicious, probably rightly, from Watergate and so many other scandals that we live in. But we do live in the age of the cynic. And so what we have figured out sort of is that people want their leaders, and specifically I would say their pastor, to be a fool, to truly believe what she or he is saying or selling, because they are comfortable in the role of the cynic. How I learned this is a really interesting story. When we were at the Loft LA, we did dialogical preaching. Two of us would present the idea, and we had a system worked out. My partner was usually the good cop. I was usually the bad cop, a role that I'm well suited for. And it worked well to present an idea, to poke holes at it, to wrestle with it, pull at it a little bit, deconstruct, whatever you want to call that. And it was very freeing. It was one of the first times in my life that I had ever been able to say what I actually think, or to vocalize and verbalize my suspicions and my doubts in faith. It was a very liberating experience. But we ran into a couple problems. One is that because I was always playing bad cop, I felt a little pigeonholed, because when it was time to be pastoral, I didn't always have the platform for which to do that. And so that became a limitation. So I came up with the idea that if we flipped roles, and I would be the good cop and my partner would be the bad cop. The problem was it didn't naturally fit his disposition to be the bad cop, so that may not have always come across as genuine. But the bigger problem is that because I had already established myself as a cynic and as the bad cop, that we would have this exchange and everyone would nod along and play, and then we'd have our conversations about it. But then after the gathering, people would come up to me and say, "Yeah, but what do you really think?" And it's just one of those things that I had already established this role and expectation, and it was tough to get out of. So life changed the way it did, and I ended up leaving the Loft LA to come up to Portland to become a professor. During that year of being a professor, I visited a different church almost every Sunday. And some were where my students were in ministry or attended. Some were just churches that I was curious about. But every week when I would drive home from visiting a new church, I would say to myself, if I ever get to be a pastor again, I know what I'm going to do different. I know how I could do this differently. And it was based on this idea of the cynic and the fool. Because what I figured out is, while it was freeing for me to be the bad cop and to voice my concerns, you can't make disciples based on what you don't believe. It's just, the equation doesn't work. The nature of discipleship doesn't work if you define yourself by what you're not. And that's just something I found out kind of in the moment, in 2020 hindsight, right? It's always 2020 hindsight. So I decided I'm going to do this different. And if I ever get back into ministry, if I ever have the opportunity to be a pastor again, I'm going to be a fool. And it's not just that it fits my posture, my internal disposition well, but it actually is what the church needs. It's what people need. It's what congregations respond to. And it's because of this idea based on the cynic and the fool. People are so practiced with being cynical that what they cannot have is their pastor being the most cynical person in the room and then trying to make them a fool, a true believer, for something that they're very suspicious about or maybe not that committed to. It doesn't work. The equation doesn't work. What they're very comfortable with is if I'm the fool and I say what I truly believe, right, all the way down and I'm committed to, then they, at coffee hour or as they drive through the drive-through on their way home or they go to Applebee's or whatever they do, they can say to the people in their car or across the table from them, you know, Pastor seems pretty convinced about this, but I'm not so sure. Or, he makes it sound so simple, but you know, what about blah, blah, blah? It's a second nature at this point for us to poke holes in things and be the cynic. We're practiced at it and we're very comfortable with it. And so I said, if I ever get back into ministry, I'm going to be a fool. And so that's what I've done. I have come here and I have decided that, here's the trick though. You have to get yourself as the leader or minister, the presenter, facilitator. You have to get yourself to the place. You have to invest in yourself and do your internal work, your disciplines, to get yourself to the place that you believe everything you're saying. So that you say what you really believe. Authentically, truly, right, with integrity. And when you get up, for me on Sundays, and you say what you truly believe, you can be foolish about it. You can be a cheerleader. You can be a salesman. You can be what you need to be. And you present this in like almost a naive way, like, of course this is the way to go. And of course this is a faith that works. And like, who could doubt this? And what could be the problem? And if we all banded together, we could do this, we're going to leave better than we came. And I know that some of you are like right now being very cynical and you're thinking, ugh. But here's the thing. You can't be a cynic to make fools. It just doesn't work. But if you're a fool, because of the nature of our culture right now, our society, people will play that role of the cynic, but if you are consistent week after week, even if they only come 60% towards being a fool or 80%, the movement, the internal movement and the corporate synergy is profound. You don't need them to believe 100% of what you believe. You don't need them to be as committed, or I should say you don't need everyone to be as committed as you are to the idea. But if you corporately can get them to be 60% or 80% involved, committed, participating, you'll really have so much energy and just a raw capacity, and then you can harness that and do something really profound with it. So it's just one of those things where I have decided that for me, it's Church 2.0, becoming a conversational community. I'm going to be a fool for it. I've put all my eggs in this basket. I am willing to sink or swim with this ecclesiology, this view of the church. And I will be a salesman for it, and I will go down with the ship if it doesn't work. But I'm not going to second guess myself. I'm not going to cover my bases. I'm not going to have a plan B and be half-hearted about this. My congregation, my city, I would say our culture, needs me and us to be fools for this, committed to it. Not in a perverse or self-aware way of getting something done. Just that we are too much of that, right? But if you can get yourself into a place where you are saying what you believe and you are believing what you're saying, and then you do what you say and believe, and you say and believe what you do, you can present that with integrity in a way that allows people to play the role that they're more comfortable playing. And from that, you can harness great possibility. So that is how I have learned to pastor the cynic and the fool. Let me know what you think. If you have questions, concerns, comments, I'd really like to engage in this topic.